So guys, for the first time in my life, I am officially on a Concorde. So here you've got some aircrafts, a variety of aircrafts. You've got a Royal Mail aircraft. So these buses were used to transport troops to the front lines in France and Belgium during the First World War. And here you get a better idea of the actual aircraft itself in all its glory. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. And today I've got another video for you. I'm doing the Imperial War Museum here in Duxford in Cambridgeshire. Now this museum is Britain's largest aviation museum with, I believe, more than 200 airplanes basically. So we're going to go inside now. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was an airfield that was in use during the days, obviously, of the wars. If I'm not mistaken, I'll put it on the screen. But we're going to go inside now and have a look at the cool history and pay tribute to the Royal Air Force. So behind me, you've got a British A-34 Comet cruiser tank that was used during the Second World War. Now, this originally came into service in 1944, where it served on the front line. So as you can see, this was the first British tank that was similar in performance to the powerful German tanks of the Second World War. This entered service in the winter of 1944 and was originally a modified version of the Cromwell tank, basically. And as you can see it there in action. This was in 1945 in Germany, and you can see a crew here obviously working the actual tank, basically. This had a Rolls-Royce V12 engine in it, basically. Maximum speed 29 miles an hour, maximum armor 4 inches, basically, with 2 machine guns and 177mm gun also. So guys, I was correct. So Duxford, where I'm standing now, was the site of the historic Duxford Aerodrome. And essentially what that means is that planes were based here to take off during the Second World War. Now, especially this was common during the Battle of Britain, where it was one of the biggest air battles in the history of aviation, basically. So it was from here where the planes, a lot of them, were launched and lifted off, obviously, to fight. Now, during the Second World War, the Americans as well also had some planes here as well also. So it was a joint Allied operation. Now, the aerodrome was in use until 1961. And then in 1969, the Ministry of Defence rendered this place useless, basically. So the Imperial War Museum, who also owned the Imperial Museum in Lambeth in London, also Churchill's War Rooms, also HMS Belfast, also the RAF Museum, took control of this location and turned it into this cool museum that we see here. So guys, behind me is the first hangar. Let's go inside now and have a look. You get an idea from the outside as to how big this hangar is. You can see exactly the doors that were used to obviously get each aircraft inside the hangar. So behind me is the damaged fuselage from Rudolf Hess, who was Adolf Hitler's deputy during the Second World War. Now, Rudolf made a trip from Nazi Germany to Scotland, where he essentially tried to make peace talks, and he tried to do it behind Hitler's back. Now, this here is his damaged fuselage, because obviously it didn't happen. The peace talks obviously didn't happen, but you get an idea here of the damage that obviously it caused. So as you can see, he flew on a solo mission to Scotland to negotiate a peace treaty without Hitler's knowledge. After failing to locate his destination and running low on fuel, he bailed out in his aircraft crash. He was arrested and imprisoned in Britain for the remainder of the war. In 1946, he was convicted for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials and was transferred to a prison in Berlin, where he remained there until his death in 1987, and that's him right there. And this here was one of the 2 diagonal Benz engines that powered the fuselage that he essentially flew in, that crash. So behind me you've got a Tornado GR4 aircraft, which was used by the RAF between 2003 and 2019. Now, this was mainly used in a variety of missions, mainly across the Middle East, in places like Libya, and Afghanistan. Well, Libya is technically North Africa, but you get the point basically. Now this was manned normally by 2 people. So as you can see, the aircraft was used by the RAF between 2003 and 2019, and it was flown in places like Afghanistan, Libya, and all over the Middle East basically, pretty much. So as you can see, it's the most significant combat jet used by the RAF during the last 20 years. And essentially it was deployed in pairs by a pilot and a weapons systems officer, which had been used for intelligence gathering, close air support, and air-to-ground attack missions. And as you can see, it was in Afghanistan between 2011 and 2014, frequently operating in support of ground forces. Yes, it's a BVS-10 Viking armoured personnel carrier, which was used first used in 2006 by the Royal Marines, pretty much, mainly in Afghanistan basically. But as I mentioned before, it was very, very good for sort of rough terrain and stuff. And also as well, obviously the campaign ended in 2014, and unfortunately 456 British troops were killed and many more suffered injuries in the operations in Helmand province. Here you can see in better detail. You can see by the tracks there at the bottom basically, and this was very, very good for rough and rugged terrain. Also in there as well, guys, you've got a Lock 3 A3 missile, which was Britain's primary nuclear weapon between the 1960s and the 1990s. Now, the responsibility for the nuclear program went from the RAF to the Royal Navy, and you can see exactly roughly what the nuclear missile would have looked like. So behind me you've got an Airco de Havilland DH9, and this was Britain's first, or one of the first strategic bombers during the First World War. Now a strategic bomber, or strategic bombing, was where a country would target a civilian area to essentially damage supplies and lower civilian morale. The Germans were the first to sort of do it, and eventually Britain followed suit. So this is exactly what this was used for. So as you can see, it was built in London, in Hammersmith, in 1917 basically, and it was intended for the assignment of 110 Squadron as a training machine. It was never used, but instead placed in storage. So the crew, two pilots, a bomb aimer / gunner, and also as well the weapons. It was a bomb load of 209 kilograms, one nose mounted, and as you can see, dimensions, length and height and span. And as you can see, the maximum speed was 102 miles per hour. And there you can see the plane in action basically. This was being used in 1919 in Somaliland. I'm guessing that's Somalia in Africa. And then you've got it there as well being used also. So this here is a Hawker Hunter. And this was the RAF's main interceptor fighter during the 1950s and main ground attack aircraft during the 1960s. The aircraft was served right here in Duxford. Now, this one here in front of me was built in 1956 and was allocated first to number 92 Squadron and then to number 65 Squadron right here in Duxford until 1961, and it was acquired by this museum in 1986. So this here is a Gloucester Javelin FAW-9, and this was the RAF's main all-weather fighter from 1956 to 1964. Javelins operated with number 64 Squadron right here at Duxford between 1958 and 1961. This was the world's first twin-jet delta wing fighter, designed to meet very high performance requirements. It had very long endurance and could operate at high altitude and in all weather. And these entered service with the RAF in February 1956. So behind me you can see Avro Lancaster, arguably probably the most famous aircraft used by Britain during the Second World War. Now this dropped more bombs than any other kind of aircraft during the Second World War. But what was most impressive about it was the size of it and how quick it was and how efficient it was used during the Second World War. So essentially here you can see the aircraft itself, and obviously you can see how big it was, how wide it is as well, and you can see the exact compartment where they used to put the actual like missiles and stuff and bombs into to drop on enemy combatants. So guys, you get an idea of how big they were and how wide they are as well. You've got one end there, and you've also got one end here as well also. And then you can see exactly the missiles there. Now this is called a Hanley Page Victor, I think it is, and this was used during the Cold War to carry nuclear weapons. Now during the Cold War, things changed. The threat went from being physical to nuclear, so these aircrafts here were built to carry nuclear bombs throughout the world or wherever at a time when nuclear war, the threat was very, very high. And here you can see a diagram of the aircraft dropping the bombs basically, pretty much. So guys, here you've got a Western Lynx multi-role helicopter used by the RAF since probably about 1977. It served in nearly every British Army combat theatre since 1979, including in Northern Ireland and also in Iraq. So yeah guys, you get an idea of how many aircrafts and stuff are in here guys. There's only one hangar by the way guys. This is just one hangar. So this here is a Soviet supersonic jet fighter from 1959 pretty much. And it was in service with the Hungarian Air Force, but it was donated to the RAF and came here in 1997. Here you've got a Westland Wessex, which was the world's first helicopter to be powered by a gas turbine turboshaft engine, manned by a crew of 4, 2 pilots, 1 observer and 1 underwater control crewman. Guys, look at the size of this. This is a British Aircraft Corporation TSR-2 aircraft, guys. This is absolutely incredible. Look at the size of this. So as you can see, it was developed to meet any very demanding specifications. It had to operate from rough, unprepared landing strips, be maneuverable and fly supersonic at low level. It also had to fly at high altitudes at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound basically. So you get an idea of it there in action, and then you get an idea of technical parts, so crew, a pilot and a navigator. And you get an idea of the specifications as well. It had a bomb load up to about 2,722 kilograms. So who remembers this iconic aircraft behind me, the Concorde? Now this one I believe was not the passenger Concorde, this was a military Concorde, but you can go inside and have a look. So let's go inside now and have a look and see what's in there. But as you can see, it's absolutely huge. Right, so in we go into the Concorde. I'm wrong actually, this is a normal passenger plane actually. And in we go. You get an idea what it was like, pretty much. Look at all this. That's an emergency power unit there. So guys, for the first time in my life, I am officially on a Concorde. No, second time actually, or first. I went to one in Barbados, there's a Concorde exhibition there. But just to remind you, the Concorde was an aircraft of luxury. It was for the rich, the famous, the upper echelon, and it was very, very quick. Now for context, my family come from Barbados, and a normal commercial airline would get there in about 8 hours, right? The Concorde would do it in 5. That's how quick this aircraft was. Now you can't sit in the seats, guys, you can't sit in the seats, but you get an idea of what kinds of people would have sat here. And as you can see, pretty much, VIPs travelled with the aircraft on test flights, pretty much. And you get an idea here basically. And here you've got some screens. You can see the Concorde will land in some very awkward landing strips, but you can see as we walk through here what the inside of the plane would have looked like. So I'm guessing this would have been an emergency door. There's the door there. And there would have been one here as well. So here you've got a couple seats. And you can see how it would have been used. Data was collected by paper, trace and manual logging, as you can see here. And this was known as the Flight Test Observers Station. And that's where the pilot would have sat, or pilots, but obviously you can't go in there, but you get an idea of what it was like. So yeah guys, I think that was very, very cool. I like how they've kept the Concorde untouched, basically because the Concorde of its time was an iconic aircraft, so I'm glad that it was untouched, but really, really cool. So as you can see, this aeroplane was flown from northern USA, Moses Lake, Washington, to the equator in Nairobi, Kenya. So this aircraft was designed to operate in all kinds of weather conditions, basically. And as you can see, that is the de-icer there. And pretty much you get an idea of how powerful this aircraft was. So yeah guys, you can just see more aircraft, and we're only in the first hangar. Another cool aircraft there, as you can see. Then on this side you've got a variety of Rolls-Royce Pegasus engines, pretty much, as you can see. So guys, this section is called the flying aircraft section, and all the aircraft in this section were just used purely for battle. Whereas the first one we saw were used for transporting people and goods, these aircraft in here are only used for battle. Let's have a look and see what's in here. They are doing some renovations. Let's have a look. So as you can see guys, you've got a variety of aircraft in here, pretty much. One of them there, it says Lee's Hope. You can't see it. That one there says Lee's Hope. And as you can see, it's a massive, gigantic, pretty much workshop, as you can see. So as you can see, these are all just a variety of planes. You can see as well there guys, you can see the crane as well, like a crane. So this crane here would have lifted the engines off of the aircraft, or on and off. So the engines are obviously very heavy. The crane would have lifted the engine off of the aircraft pretty much for the mechanics to essentially use and work on. So this here talks about an aircraft called Livier Cosmic Wind, known as Ballerina, built for air racing in the USA in the 1940s. So you can see there exactly what it would have looked like. I don't think they've got it in here, I can't see it, but you get an idea of what it was used for, and you can see it there in action, turning a pylon at Cleveland Air Races in 1948. And here you've got a rough idea of the size of an airplane wing, as you can see here. You see the size of it, it don't do it justice. This obviously came off of this aircraft here, pretty much. And yet again, you can see at the front, the engine has been taken out. So here we've got an American aircraft famous for being used during the Second World War. I think this was the most popular American aircraft during the Second World War. But as you can see here, I'm guessing it was stationed here as well during the Second World War. But as you can see, you get an idea of how big it is basically. This was absolutely rapid. It had a top speed of about 300 miles an hour, I think it was. But this was used in campaigns all around Europe, so in sort of Germany, France, you name it. They first went into action in France in 1942 and then made their first attacks on Germany in January 1943, as you can see there. And this here was put here to celebrate 50 glorious years, basically, for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, pretty much, as well. You can see it there. But you get an idea of this aircraft in the skies, as you can see. So here you've got a Lockheed aircraft. I did speak about this during my trip to the RAF Museum in Hendon, where I saw one there as well. That's a Lockheed aircraft. And then over here, you've got some other aircraft as well. So guys, what do you think? So you get an idea in here of the importance of the Allied alliance during, obviously, the Second World War, pretty much. And also the First World War as well. I don't know if you can see it, but right there is a Rolls-Royce engine, guys. So you can see how they fit the engine. Pretty much, I can't touch it, I can't go any further, but you can see a Rolls-Royce engine right there. And Rolls-Royce played a huge part in supplying engines to the RAF during the Second World War. Right, so this section, self-explanatory, is called Air and Sea. And let's go inside and see what there is to see. So this here is a North American P-51 Mustang. Basically, it was an American long-range fighter which played a key role in the defeat of the Luftwaffe in the Second World War. And this here in front of me is the nose section from a Type 149 Bristol boiling broke, also known as a Mark IV Blenheim. It was used in the aircraft shown in the pictures below that I'm going to show you. Following a landing accident in 2003, the fuselage section was restored and used in the Mark I Blenheim, and it was part of this aircraft that you can see right here. So here you can see the keys to instruments in this Bristol Blenheim Mark IV nose. You've got there number 6 is oil and fuel temperatures, number 8 is fuel gauges, number 29 is engine start switches, and those are all located further ahead up there. Now you've got some more information about the Bristol Blenheim, but here's some firsts for it basically. So I'll read it out. So first all-metal stress skin monoplane ordered by the RAF, first sortie against Germany in World War II, first aircraft to be equipped with air-to-air radar, first bombing raid of World War II. I won't read it all, but first ever successful interception using air-to-air radar, first RAF aircraft to sink a Japanese submarine, first RAF aircraft, first RAF sortie against Italian forces. So you get an idea of the history and some photos that tell the story over the decades. And yeah, there you can see it in action. Pretty much, this was in Greece between 1940 and 1941, and this was also in Greece as well. So these both were taken in Greece between 1940 and 1941. And yeah, maximum speed 295 miles an hour, and you can see the other dimensions there also. This here is a Hawker Fury 1, and this was the first fighter in the Royal Air Force service to exceed 200 miles an hour. It was well known during the 1930s for displays of precision aerobatics. The first Fury 1 made its maiden flight in 1931. 117 were built for the RAF during the first half of the 1930s. Pilots soon came to love the aircraft because of its elegant design, sensitivity of control, and aerobatic capability. So in front of me you've got a Percival Proctor 3, and this was a communications aircraft and radio trainer. It served with the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and also in the 1950s. Now here you can see it in action. It normally had a pilot and 1 or 2 passengers basically, and the maximum speed was 160 miles an hour pretty much. Also as well, some converted Proctors remained in RAF service as communications aircraft until 1955. After the Second World War, many surplus Proctors were sold into private ownership. Some were flown overseas by wartime pilots, returning especially to Australia and New Zealand. So behind me is a Fairey Gannet aircraft, which was in service from the 1950s to the 1970s. Now, these are really, really cool because of the success of them. They made about 346 of them, I believe, and some of them were actually exported to other countries to be used. Yeah, so as you can see, the Fairey Gannet was in service with the Royal Navy from 1955 until the 1970s. And it flew initially, I think, in 1948 to make the world's first landing by a turboprop engine aircraft on an aircraft carrier in 1950. Pretty much. I'll scroll down to not bore you. The longest serving Gannets were the 44 AEW3 versions produced from 1958 to 1961. They were completely redesigned to carry a giant surveillance radar. A total of 346 Gannets were built, of which over 70 were exported to Australia, West Germany and Indonesia. It carried a crew of 3 people. And the weapons were homing torpedoes, depth charges and mines of bombs. So this here is a cockpit section of a A6 M50 fighter, the most successful Japanese fighter aircraft of the Second World War. Now this was designed by Mitsubishi Aircraft Company, and the name is derived from the last 2 characters of the year of its adoption, basically. After proving its worth in China, the carrier base zero was used in the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Here you can see it there. You can see it in action, used by the Japanese Air Force pretty much, and you get an idea of what the dimensions were. Only a crew of 1, and maximum speed was 351 miles an hour. Here you've got a Westland Sea King. I spoke about this during my video that I did in regards to the RAF Museum in Hendon, pretty much. I think even Prince William flew or something like this, or train or something similar to this, basically, as you can see. And as you can see, you've got an aircraft from the Royal Saudi Air Force. So behind me is an old Bill bus from the First World War. So these buses were used to transport troops to the front lines in France and Belgium during the First World War. So essentially during the First World War, the armed forces had a shortage of buses, so they purchased some of these to use to transport troops to and from the various battlefields during the First World War. These could carry up to 25 personnel at a time, and King George V boarded one of these buses in 1920. It was the first bus that he ever boarded, so very, very historic basically. But this is obviously here in this museum, but it's very, very cool. When it was in service, the windows were boarded up, so obviously you couldn't see who was inside, but you get an idea roughly of what the use was of the famous Old Bill. And here you can see the famous bus being used to transport troops during the First World War. You can see them all there. So in front of me you've got a de Havilland Sea Vixen FAW2, and this was the Royal Navy's principal carrier-borne fighter of the 1960s. Now this initially went into Royal Navy service in 1959, becoming the mainstay of the carrier-borne fighter squadrons for the next 10 years or so. Though no longer the world beater which had been hoped for in the early 1950s, the Sea Vixen had performance and armament equal to most contemporary land-based fighters. It was the first British interceptor to disperse with guns, being armed with only missiles and air-to-air rockets. In front of me you've got a Biber German one-man submarine, and these were the smallest submarines in the German Navy during the Second World War. This type was designed in 1944 to meet the threat of an Allied invasion and to attack coastal shipping. Now this particular vessel here was found sinking 49 miles to the northeast of Dover on the 29th of December 1944. Its crewman, 22-year-old Hans Langdorf, was dead inside. A later post-mortem examination revealed that he had died from carbon monoxide poisoning, having failed to close the engine exhaust system properly. Now this here in front of me is a 10.5 centimeter U-boat gun basically, and this was fitted to a First World War German U-boat believed to be a U-98. The U-98 took part in 2 operations in 1917 and 4 in 1918. During its brief career, it sank 3 merchant ships, all in 1918. It was surrendered at the end of the war and was broken up in Britain during 1919 to 1920. And here you can see it in service on the ship. So yeah guys, you get an idea of the sacrifices made by the RAF and obviously the Royal Navy also, and anybody in the military. If you're a veteran watching this, thank you so much. But yeah, when I come to places like this, it's quite emotional because you get an idea of the sacrifices made essentially for this country. So here you've got some aircraft, a variety of aircraft. You've got a Royal Mail aircraft, British European Airways. This one here is from Monarch Airlines. Here you've got another one for the British Overseas Airways Corporation, as you can see there. Now guys, normally in here would be the Basalt of Britain exhibition, but it's actually closed. His hangar's closed now for renovation, but I want to show you something important in front of it guys. So this here in front of me is called a Somers Air Raid Shelter. And this is where people used to hide from bombs, from most likely obviously German bombers basically. So as you can see, Duxford had many air raid shelters to protect those who lived and worked here from German bombing attacks. The main type of shelter found on this side of the site was a Somers shelter, named after the company who built them. This was one of 4 Somers shelters on the airfield basically. And as you can see, you can see some kids there entering the shelter in the summer of a Anderson shelter in London in the summer of 1940. So this hangar talks about the conservation efforts in which the Imperial War Museum here at Duxford does to keep obviously things up to date and maintained. So let's have a look around here. It's just one big massive workshop basically. So as you can see, you've got an aircraft here being maintained. You can see it's been partially stripped here on this side, as you can see, pretty much also. And yeah, as you can see over here as well, you've got just like a massive workshop of things happening here, pretty much. So earlier I mentioned as to how cranes were used, pretty much like this basically. Cranes with like a chain to lift the engines obviously in and out of the aircraft. So you can see it here in better detail right here, as you can see, pretty much. And then you've got here just some more stuff being covered, pretty much. And then you've got a bigger crane here basically. This one can do up to 7.5 tons pretty much, but this I'm guessing would be for compartments from this aircraft, as you can see. So this here is a Avro Shackleton, a British Marine Patrol aircraft. Now fewer than 200 were actually built, but this is what you call Cold War iron. It was designed in the late 1940s in response to growing concern about the Soviet Union's rapid military expansion following the end of the Second World War. Now these were equipped with 4 Rolls-Royce engines, and they were so loud that this aircraft was known as the Growler. But pilots who actually used it and flew it loved it because of how reliable it was. But this here is an absolute machine of its time. So these are engines from a T117 E1 Staghound, which was an American 4x4 armoured car. Now I think the engines were created by Chevrolet, which is obviously a big American company, pretty much in response to US Army Ordnance Department's specification for a medium armoured car. Now here you can see a photo of it, but as you can see here in Britain, the British Army later commissioned a version known as the Staghound. Over 2,500 Staghounds were produced by Chevrolet during the Second World War, serving in Italy and Northwest Europe. So this here is a British Crusader 2 tank basically, and this was used mainly, it came into service in around 1941, and it was mainly used on the battlefields, I think, of North Africa basically. Now this was designed to obviously deal with the tough and rough terrain, pretty much, of obviously North Africa. So as you can see, yep, they were used mainly in North Africa, pretty much. It had issues with reliability and safety, partially due to the design of the vehicle itself, but also due to the harsh desert conditions in North Africa that the tank had not been designed to withstand. This prompted the fitting of sand shields to later Crusader 1 tanks, which became standard for the Crusader 2 and subsequent models basically. This Crusader 2 was built in 1942 and acquired by the museum in 1997 to research into the vehicle's ongoing history. And as you can see there, you've got servicemen operating the vehicle. Now here you've got an example of a Leyland lorry chassis and cab RAF type, basically. During the First World War, Leyland produced nearly 6,000 vehicles for the British Armed Forces. The company produced their 3-ton 4x2 lorry in such large numbers for the Royal Flying Corps and later for the Royal Air Force that it became commonly known as the RAF type. These lorries were used to transport mobile workshops, enabling engineers to carry out essential maintenance and repair work when and where needed. You have to remember that the First World War was the first conflict or war that was fought in land, air and sea. So things like vehicles, etc. became extremely important in the war. So maintenance and so on and workshops were important to keep the vehicles up to scratch during the war. So yeah guys, as you walk you just see all the various engines basically. This one here is a Renault, which is French. You've got Benz, which is German. Fiat below, which is Italian. That's a Fiat engine. Dialma Mercedes, which is German. Pretty much, you've got a variety of engines from a variety of countries, basically. Rolls-Royce up top there. I don't know if you can see it. That's obviously British. Dialma Benz. This one here, German. This one below is BMW. So you get an idea pretty much as to how important they all are. It's important to remember as well, guys, that all these car brands that we use today, like BMW, Mercedes, etc., Rolls-Royce, they were actually originally, at the start, used for military purposes. They provided engines and parts, not only for cars, but for aircraft as well, basically. So you get an idea of the history of these companies. You see there, you can just get an idea of yeah, some of the cool stuff that you can see in here, pretty much. This is a FMAIA Paraca, an Argentinian ground attack aircraft. This was designed in the 1960s. So yeah, guys, you just get an idea, pretty much. This here is from a Hanley Page Halifax, which was a heavy British bomber designed in 1937 by Georges Volcaire, basically. It was the second four-engine bomber to enter service with the RAF, with over 6,000 aircraft being produced. So this here in front of me is a 9.2-inch coastal defence gun. This is an example of one of the coastal guns used throughout the British Empire in the early 1900s. This gun was originally sited at the Spur Battery in Gibraltar. It was used across the British Empire to strategically important coastal sites from the late 19th century onwards, including Gibraltar. The range and accuracy of these guns developed rapidly during the second half of the 19th century. Now here you can see a map of Gibraltar and also where the gun would have been located right there, as you can see, facing out to the Mediterranean Sea, if I'm not mistaken, pretty much. As you can see there, or the Atlantic, whichever one it was. And you can see there, obviously, you've got the town, obviously, below. You can see it there looking over the Straits of Gibraltar right there. And as you can see the maximum range is over 16 miles. The length of the barrel is 442.35 inches. And you can see exactly more there. So guys, behind me is the exhibition to the American servicemen who served in the Second World War, who are also based here as well. There's some cool stuff in here that I want to show you, including tributes to obviously servicemen that have fallen from the US, and a bit about the US-UK alliance as well. Let's go inside and have a look. So as you can see, it was opened in 1997 by the late Queen herself, rest in peace, and it's dedicated to the memory of the 30,000 American airmen who lost their lives flying from British bases in the Second World War. On 27th of September 2002, after major additions and improvement, the museum was rededicated by the Honourable George Bush, 41st President of the United States of America, in the presence of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, which is now currently King Charles. Following major redevelopment, the American Air Museum was reopened on March 17th, 2016 by the Duke of Kent, basically. So here you can see a photo of some American servicemen in Europe, basically. So as you can see, in the Second World War, hundreds of thousands of young American men were sent to Britain, pretty much. And as you can see, just some memorabilia here. I'm guessing that's some kind of American jacket. You've got some letters there, I'm guessing, sent to the soldiers from the US to here. And then you've got some names and dates of tags of soldiers who served. So this is the suit and helmet of pilot Gary Powers, basically. His aircraft was shot down over Soviet airspace on the 1st of May 1960, and he was taken prisoner, pretty much. But you get an idea of what he wore. So this here is a Liberty V12 aero engine, and over 15,000 of these engines were built in the US, many of them by women working in factories for the first time. It was designed by Packard Motor Company engineers, and it was manufactured by them and other American car companies under pressure to turn out engines very, very quickly. So here you've got two uniforms of two men. So one was American and one was British, and they both served together during the First World War. I think this one was British, and this one was American, pretty much, if I'm not mistaken. No, I'm sorry. No. This one was American, this one was British, basically. The American guy was called William Shotlow Douglas, And the British guy was called George A. Vaughan, basically. George shot down 13 aircraft over France, pretty much, and William Douglas commanded Vaughan's first squadron in France. So guys, the aircraft you can see right there, that one there, that is a McDonnell Douglas F-15A Eagle. This fighter, designed to shoot down enemy aircraft, has been in service from 1976, and it also has been used to attack targets on the ground. So it served in places such as Japan, Israel and Saudi Arabia. It saw action in Lebanon in 1979 and in 1981 in the Gulf War. And in 1981 and also in the Gulf War of 1991. In both conflicts, they scored victories over advanced Soviet warplanes in Syrian and Iraqi hands. In 2001, they served in Afghanistan, and from 2003, they operated in Iraq. And you get a better idea up close of what it looked like, pretty much. So, as you can see, it's very modern. So, it's a modern combat aircraft and designed to be able to refuel in flight to increase their range. So, this plane here, you can barely see it, is a North American AT-60 Texan Harvard. This type of American-designed training aircraft was used by almost all American and British pilots who learned to fly in the Second World War. So you get a better idea here what it looked like, basically, this one, and also this one as well, which is basically what you can see in front of me here, pretty much. Now, Britain actually bought over 1,000 to help train RAF pilots before the war began. America continues to supply them to Britain as part of a Lend-Lease. Over here, they were known as Harvards. In the USA, they were known as Texans. Over 16,000 were built in the USA, as well as 2,600 in Canada and 750 in Australia. So that aeroplane there, that says HU, that is a North American B-25J Mitchell airplane. This bomber was used to attack targets on or near the front line during the Second World War. It went into service with the US Army Air Forces in 1941. Production increased after America entered the war. In total, just under 10,000 were built. And here you get a bit more information about it, pretty much. They were armed with machine guns for defense, but by late 1944 in Italy, this was really required, pretty much. And then you get an idea of also the bombardier's only escape route in an emergency was a narrow crawlway between the nose and the rest of the aircraft. If it was blocked, he was trapped. Also in the far background, right there, this one here with the little white bit, this is a Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, pretty much. And here it is in more detail here, as you can see. Now, this here was one of the main types of American fighters. P-47s escorted bombers on their missions and attacked targets on the ground, pretty much. They actually replaced the longer range P-51 in the escort role. However, the Thunderbolt's rugged construction and air-cooled engine meant that it could survive enemy fire in low-level ground attacks far better than the Mustang. Its firepower was also heavier, which is why P-47s of the US 9th Air Force were so successful in close support of the American armies advancing through Europe in 1944 to 1945. So they were heavily armed with 8 machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, basically. So 4 here, and then 4 in the other side, which you can't see here, pretty much. The racks here under the wings were for either 2 bombs or 2 drop tanks, pretty much. And the black and white stripes on the wing were temporarily identification markings applied to all Allied tactical aircraft just before the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944. They were designed to prevent aircraft from being attacked by friendly forces. So here you've got the uniform, as you can see, of this man here, James Waddell, pretty much. He was a black American who served alongside other black American troops. He helped build the airfields that made the air war possible. He served here in Britain, obviously, for the American Army. Sadly, many black American veteran stories were lost because they weren't interviewed about the experiences after the war, pretty much. And also, as well, you have to remember that, unfortunately, during this time in America, the military was actually segregated, basically. So it was very hard to get this kind of information from many other black soldiers, but he was still an important part of the war and and his service is always valued. But you can see here his uniform. Here you've got two uniforms, one uniform here and another one here. And these uniforms are of these two people here, one called Huey Lamb and the other one called Len Thorne. And both flew Mustangs here at Duxford. He was from Texas, pretty much, and he came here in the autumn of 1944 and left shortly after the war ended, pretty much. And Len Thorne was from, where was he from in America? I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure where he was from, but you can see both uniforms here, as you can see, and you've also got like a journal and a bag as well also. So this lady here is called Ethel Sarah Sale, and she was one of the nurses who decided to help injured American servicemen during the Second World War. So as you can see, over 30,000 of them lost their lives, thousands more were wounded, as you can see, and they were cared for by surgeons and nurses on the bases, pretty much, to help deal with the injuries. And as you can see there, you've got the interior of an air ambulance flying from Italy to Tunisia in 1943. Here you can see their uniforms, basically. So you can see here on the hat, you can see a symbol that represents obviously a nurse, pretty much. As you can see there, you've got more here as well. And as you can see, this one here is for a guy named Bryce Weldy, pretty much. He was a doctor. He was from Fort Wayne, Indiana in the US. He was specialized in medicine of the ears, nose, throat and eyes. And he served as a flight surgeon, basically. One of them is dedicated to Ethel, basically, who I spoke about, Ethel Saracel. And down here you can see just some letters, the American Red Cross and stuff. In regards to pretty much, their days at work, basically, which is really, really cool. This is from 1944. So here you've got three famous American servicemen. I'll start from this side, the left. So this here is Carl Spaatz. By 1944, he commanded all of the American strategic air forces in Europe. This one here is Ira Eker. He led the 8th Air Force based in Britain, then the Mediterranean Allied Air Forces. And he was clear in his views that bombing Germany was the right thing to do, even if it meant civilians were killed in the attacks, basically. This one here is a guy called James Doolittle. He was one of America's most famous aviators and commanders. He replaced General Eker as Commanding General of the 8th Air Force. He decided the fighters that escorted the bombers should play a more offensive role, seeking out and destroying the German Air Force. So you can see a flight map on September 11th of aircraft being forced to ground after essentially, obviously the planes had crashed into the Twin Towers and also the other two, one into the Pentagon and the other one into the airfield. So you get an idea of obviously what it was like on that day and how chaotic it was. Some aircrafts had to land in Canada as well, and also Mexico as well, because obviously US airspace was closed off. So here you can see then President George W. Bush and then British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who were very, very close as allies, basically. They got on very, very well. But as you can see, this talks about obviously what led up to it, pretty much, and then obviously the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So as you can see, pretty much this is from obviously the Twin Towers, and then it just gives you a bit of information as to what happened on that fateful morning. I do remember where I was actually in school, and I remember getting home and my dad calling my auntie who lives in the US, who lives in New York, about what happened, basically. She explained that she was at work and she saw this moment. She saw when the second plane hit the second building, basically, pretty much. And finally, this is a honor guard sculpture and was designed by award-winning sculptor Zenos Frauskis, pretty much. It depicts the colors flight of the United States Air Force Honor Guard, basically, pretty much. Down here at the bottom, you can see the names of all of the members of the squadron, or the Honor Guard, I think it was. You can see all the names there, pretty much. And yeah, it's just a little tribute to them. And then you've got it with the uniform that they wore, with their badges. I don't know if you can see it there, but as you can see, it's a cool tribute basically.